see how that works. This is a kind of a peculiar problem that I always like to talk about. I usually run electrical classes through this. I had this Crown Victoria, which is, it was a state car that everybody was driving at the time. It's this lady that was driving it came and she said, "I hear strange noises coming from under the hood." And, the weak links in these chains, as you'll see, like we're talking about these 92 was when the town car first got to 4.6. And when I was in the field, the 4.6 came out in the Lincolns in 91, and then 92 came out in the Crown Vics, and we didn't hardly have to do any work on them. It's pretty surprising, for several years they wasn't, almost never saw them in the shop. They're a really good one. But there's a lot of these little weak links that they'll catch before they release the new platform. We didn't really see a lot of that on these 4.6s. But it was a long time, like I say, before we got that. There were 200,000 or 300,000 miles on them, you'll see, and they still running strong, like on some of these cars that we got in our fleet here. There were some weak links, like some of the sensors would die and all that, and they weren't too hard to do. But no 4.6 liter of this kind ever had a distributor, so basically it was just built from the ground up as a coil package. Now, on this one here, the driver reported she heard this humming noise after switching the key off, but the noise had stopped after she cycled a key. Okay, so this is kind of peculiar here too. You might notice on this Crown Victoria over on the driver's side fender, there's a little square connector. It looks like it plugs into an injector, but there's really nothing plugged into it. Well, if you jumper those two wires together, the fuel pump runs all the time. I had actually seen people plug something into there, like they were checking. They thought they were setting the timing, and they'd unplug the spout connector and set the timing, and somehow get confused and plug that back into that when they were in a fuel pump be running all the time. That's what popped into my mind. Somebody a fuel pump running all the time. So I asked her, was the humming coming from the rear? Well, I said the relay contacts might be intermittently sticking, making the fuel pump keep running. Because sometimes on these relays, the little contacts will weld themselves together. They just keep carrying power when they're not supposed to. All right, so she said this noise was coming from the front, but it stopped when I switched the key on and then off again. That shot the fuel pump area to flip. And it needed an oil change, so I put it on one of the lifts and made that happen. I was by myself that day because it was between classes and all that. When I noticed the noise coming from the engine compartment was nothing even remotely resembled a hum. It was a cyclic clicking in about once, every 2 seconds. Click, 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 click. I mean, you can just hear it all over the place under the hood. It was just as regular as clockwork, and it could be a computer glitch, whatever, with the clocks and stuff in that silver box. We've seen a lot of weird things happen with these computers. Now, one day in the new car department, when Aerostars were still brand new and they were out there, they were a lot of them out there. This boy come over there and he says, the high beam indicator on this Aerostar is just blinking. Like when I put on the high beams, it just blinks. And so I told him a couple of things to check, but it was kind of hard for him to figure out what was going on because it was consistently blinking. And so he had the instrument cluster pulled out. And what I did whenever he called me over there, a little high beam indicator right here, when you turn on the high beam lights, it fires up a high beam indicator. It would flash on and on, just like a turn signal indicator, but the turn signal weren't even on, Key wasn't even on, you just turn on the headlights, it'd start doing that. And so basically, a little high beam indicator right there, might that come to be from the daytime running lights module, because sometimes that power goes up. This one wasn't equipped with that. So here we go. I got my hand back here on this little bulb socket that was the one for the high beam indicator, and I put my finger on it, and it stayed on. So I took that little thing out of there. See how you set the little things? I took these, the little thing out, and you see these little tabs right here? I bent those tabs a little more so that they would bite harder onto that, and it stopped doing all that. Now, it must have been hot enough to where it was creating a little, it would get a little warm and move a little bit like it turned into a strange thing. And they were just barely touching. Well, on this Crown Vicky, I could hear 2 of these relays, and you recognize those relays. You guys have seen those before, haven't you? I heard 2 of those relays just clicking off and on. Put my hand on them, it said click, 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 click. Like, what's turning those relays off and on? What's up with that? So one of them was a power relay, and the other was a fuel pump relay. And they both clicking together. All right, so I said, well, let's just scope this and see what we see. So I hooked the breakout box up, and I scoped a whole bunch of pins on this thing, and there was a bunch of pins on that engine controller that were getting this same clicking off and on business going on. That's what it looked like on the scope. Now, what am I supposed to do with this information? I don't know, looking at that. All right, so, and I've seen bad PCM do that kind of thing. Oh, this Under the Shade Tree article I wrote on my buddy's pickup truck. I was over there one day, and the truck was cutting up, and they head off down to the chicken house, and they try to quit on them and all that, and they just kind of parked the truck for a little bit. And I went up there and got to looking at it, and I had said, well, I found out on that particular one, I thought it was a bad ground or something to begin with, but I found out on that particular one that the engine controller was doing that, sending out something similar to that. It was firing the coil and everything else. So I got his dad's truck, was the same year model, but it was a blue and white one. And I took the engine controller off of this truck and plugged it into his dad's truck, and his dad's truck started doing the same thing. What's the common denominator of that engine controller? You got it? That's how I did that. And so there, the ground over here, I couldn't locate any loose grounds on this one. I'm checking right there to see what I see. Battery ground cable connected to the engine block. I mean, it's always a good idea to look at them blocks, even if they're hard to get to. Find out, look at them. Sometimes a ground will look good and be bad. Now you can use voltage drop to check it, to see what you got there. Get back to square one. All right, so I plugged in the scan tool. Pull the code, check the click, and always stop with the key switched on. I found nothing except a 1288 trouble code telling me the cylinder head temperature sensor recorded a reading that was too hot at some point. I wonder what that means. You think that's significant? Have anything to do with what we're talking about? Can you tie it together? All right, the 1288 was my first real clue to what was going on. A peek into the data stream showed me a normal reading on the coolant, the cylinder head temperature with a cold engine about 3.6 volts. I wanted to know more than that. All right, the memory code was a rabbit trail. Should have done a key on engine off test. Well, I got sidetracked when I decided to check the coolant, which as it turned out was really low. That was another clue. There was no coolant in the oil and nothing leaking on the ground. Maybe it was an intake or a head gasket leak. Plastic intake likes to leak. We had to change one the other day, Emmanuel did. All right, so I added about a gallon of coolant, made a note that I needed to keep track of the coolant level. I ran the engine for a little while, monitored the coolant cylinder head temperature on the NGS, didn't see any alarming numbers, no compression in the coolant, switched the key off. There was that ticking again, tick, 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 all back again. So I found myself gathering data too fast and with too little time to sort it out. So I just plugged in another PCM I had on hand, but the clicking was still there. So I thought, so it's not a PCM. All right, I wasn't surprised if it wasn't a good feeling. So I dug in my heels. I'm going to untangle this thing. So I looked at my scope readings and the pins at which I'd taken the readings. I realized pins 71 and 97 were showing some unusual voltage activity that would explain why all the other pins were so lively. If you're delivering voltage to this, what's the first thing happens whenever you fire up? The power relay fires up pins 71 and 97. What happens first that you can detect with your ears? What I'm always telling you to listen to see if the engine controller is awake. Fuel pump, right? Turn on the key. If the fuel pump kicks on and runs, you know the engine controller is awake and it's thinking. All right, so if you power this one up, and then you took the power away and powered it up and took the power away, you'd have this, wouldn't you? So, especially since the engine controller, the other one I plugged in that I happen to have on hand, did the same thing. All right, so I homed in on the problem. I moved to the underhood fuse panel, and I started pulling fuses until the clicking stopped. It's a good way to do that, isn't it? And with that general area, I noticed a burning smell. Now I'm really getting warm, so to speak. No burning smell, no pun intended there, but we got one. Now I homed in on it. About 8 inches behind the PDC is a high current relay center, and that contains the starter relay and the fan relay. There was a cover on it, so I couldn't see the relays until I removed the cover. And this is what I found. Now that relay right there, not only did it burn up, it burned up this box here too. And at that time I had a 98 Crown Victoria police car out there that was the same basic car that was a trainer car. And that relay operates the fan. This other relay operates the starter. Okay, but the starter one won't get me in trouble. So that particular relay right there, if it operates the fan, is it conceivable that it was sitting somewhere and the fan tried to come on and couldn't, and the motor tried to get a little too hot?
Could be.
If it had done that more than once, is it conceivable it would have pushed some coolant out because it got a little too hot, you know, pushing it out by the radiator cap? See, all of that stuff ties together when you find out what was really going on. Now, if I'd have gone into NGS and told it to turn on the coolant fan, I might have caught that. But what I'm hearing is clicking on the opposite side of the engine compartment. This was causing it because, you see this right here? Internal short on the coolant fan relay. So what was that doing? All right, that internal short on the coolant fan relay was causing this, short in power to this red wire that actually feeds the pin 71 and 97 of the power frame. Of course, I'm not showing that on here, but it was feeding the pin 71 and 97. All right, what happened as soon as 71 and 97 fired up, the fuel pump relay would try to come on. Well, the fuel pump relay was pulling enough current to where it was pulling that voltage down to where the PCM said, whoop, can't run the fuel pump, don't have enough voltage, and it would shut the fuel pump down. And this would repeat itself. It would click on and off, on and off, on and off. So it was back feeding the power to the EEC circuit, that's what it was doing, and that was giving me that scope pattern up there, and that clicking off and on everything. So basically, when you turned on the key, that one there, your B plus source, would override that because you'd get another source that was stronger, and then the pump would come on and the car would run and all that, I mean, the fuel pump relay's not showing on here, but you got one of those situations, and then you got this burned up relay. When that was shorted out with the key off, you were firing that up, but it would cycle off and on because the fuel pump was pulling the current that it was. And that was because of the burned out relay. The relay tipped its hand by cycling the PCM. And I was smelling it when I got over there. Here's another thing, if you smell something burning, you need to be going to find out what that is. Because it's a pretty good chance it's got something to do with what you're doing. Now I will tell you this, one little piece of wire under the dash of a car that long, if the smoke goes out of it, if it gets shorted out and something burns a piece of wire, just a piece of wire that long, it'll fill the whole cab up with smoke. Then it'll make you swear excuse me, you'd swear your whole wire harness is going to pot. But I mean that one little piece of wire will burn slam up. We put a ignition switch on a little Ford Ranger one time, and there's a ground that's feeding the ignition switch so that it can test out the brake light. And that ignition switch was shorted internally, and when we turned on the key, it burned a little ground wire about that long. It's coming from the ignition switch connector over, and it's the way it filled the smoke up on that, cab up on that truck, and think you'll have to put a whole new wire harness in it. Just that one little smoke. Now that's poison smoke too. So you don't need to breathe in that. It ain't near as much fun as smoking cigarettes. All right, so got it from the local salvage yard. Actually, initially what I did was I got the relay center, that high current relay center off that police car out there. Snip, snip, snip. And I soldered it all in there and made it look like factory. That's what's on that card. But that's the end of the slideshow. That was a little short one. And I'm gonna, It didn't take long, but I'm gonna go through another little short one with you too, right here. Let me see. This doesn't take very long to go through that. These are some scope basics I want to hit you with. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time. There's a lot of words on these slides, but look at these scope. You got an x-axis going this way, a y-axis going the other way, and all of them have screens that waveform shown on. This part of the scope right here, where you got this grid. Does anybody remember what that's called? That's a graticle. Graticle, that's what that is. That shows the change of voltage through time. So basically it's like, you did graph paper in school, right? The scope's doing it for you, all right? So oscilloscope can show the changes in one or more input signals over time. That's amplitude. The shape of the voltage being accounted makes the phase and frequency measurements. You can get all kinds of information from this. And you got a zero line here, right there. And all of them have screens like that. The signal, now on the little scope I got right outside the door here, you can turn off that radical if you just want to look at a black screen that ain't got no lines on it. It's got 3 different systems, vertical, horizontal, and trigger. And the control panel of an oscilloscope is divided into these 3 sections. When you're using a scope, you adjust the settings in these areas to accommodate the incoming signal. You might have seen me setting the trigger on some of these to make the pattern stay in the middle of the screen. You can also set the trigger at a certain point so that if you're driving along with your scope hooked up and something drops out of line, and when it surpasses that voltage, it draws a pattern and freezes it right there. But the trigger is actually a marker you put on the screen. If the voltage goes right here, I want you to display that there or whatever. The vertical is the amplification of the signal. Horizontal is the time base. So you can zoom in this way, you can zoom in that way. And then the trigger, it stabilizes a repeating signal. Like if you got like on the crank sensor, you want that tall tooth to stay in the middle, that's how you do that. Now this right here is a DC coupling, you got 0 volts at the bottom of that, and when it turns it on, it's up there. The duty cycle on this is about 50%. See, so it's on about half the time and off about half the time. On the AC coupling, the 0 is right in the middle and the AC is going above and below that. That's like reversing your polarity back and forth. You got it? These guys are about turned into a skeleton in here. All right. Sometimes whenever you're looking at like ignition signals or something, you're going to have to invert the signal. Whenever you flip it over. If the signal is like it's supposed to be. Sometimes if it's upside down and you don't like the way it looks, you can invert the signal. And so you got that. All right, you got the horizontal system, acquisition of input. So horizontal controls are used to position and scale the waveform horizontally, and time base is the most important setting here. As you change your time base, you're going to be expanding, or you're going to zoom in this way. So you can zoom that way and that way. We're going to give you all some, I'll probably give you all some really complicated and complex oscilloscope exercises to do for one of your final exams. So I'll have to fold my arms, and if you don't do it right, you get, X'd out like a Ghostbuster and all that kind of stuff. All right, so trigger is one of the key functions. So the trigger event defines the point in time in which a repeating window of a waveform information is stabilized for viewing. The moment when plotting the new screen starts is called triggering. So basically, you can tell it, if you're using several different inputs, you can tell it which one to trigger off of. You can tell it if you're going to trigger on the rising slope or the falling slope, or whatever. You can drag it around your screen with your mouse or whatever, or with your direction buttons. When you set the trigger level, you ought to take into consideration a constant input signal offset, and that's automatic triggering is a good force for measuring periodically repeated signals. A signal is often used when the input signal is variable, not repeated periodically in time. All right, your input probes, you can set those up for your various different channels on here. 10-to-1 attenuator. Basically, a 10-to-1 attenuator is like a resistor sort of thing that keeps a spike from coming back into your meter from, and frying the circuits in your meter. Like if you're checking the ignition coil primary, that's like a 400 volt spike that's coming out of that thing, and you don't want that screaming into your $1,200 picoscope or whatever, right? So you put attenuators in there, 10-to-1, 20-to-1, and you got current clamps, and then you got these pickups and all that stuff on it. And so there's all these different kind of pickups you can have there. And you got pressure sensors and stuff too you can use. Presets. You got presets where you can divide it sensors, injectors, ignition, diesel, electrical system, communication, and they automatically adjust the vertical, scales, time base. They usually work pretty darn good. Sometimes I've had to rescale them to get a pattern that I like, but for the most part. And then CANBUS measurements are pretty important when you're trying to find out so if you put this cursor right here following your mouse pointer, you can put a cursor there and it'll tell you what your time is and what your voltage is on that particular line. See, that's what you're using that for. And so you want to determine the exact value of the parameter on the y-axis and the time on the x-axis. You can measure the difference between the x and y values between 2 points. This is something you just got to play with a scope. Now you've seen this before, right? You guys, we've gone over that, but you can actually press your 720 degree button on the scope that I got in there, and you can drag these out and get 720 degree cursors, and you can actually track what's going on and where the cylinder is and all that kind of stuff. Make diagnosis easier, but you make a corresponding operating cycle there when you're doing that. Now there's your, what kind of signal is that? Look at the red words underneath the screen. Crank position, you knew that, that's a missing tooth, right? But you notice there were 0 volts is on this one here. 0 volts is way down here on that one. Most of it's above the line, you see, on that particular pattern there. It's an electromagnetic sensor. Fuel system makes synchronization of injectors possible. And this right here, piezo injectors are basically a peculiar thing. You know, the Ford Power Strokes were using those. And what they do there is they got a piece of quartz in there, and whenever you energize it, it gets a thousandth of an inch shorter. And that opens up and lets the fuel spray. But you also have to energize it to make it long again. And so if somebody is working on a diesel and they unplug injectors and they happen to unplug one while it's open, it'll just be spraying fuel the whole time. It'll burn something up in there, you know, blow a hole on top of a piston or something. So you can't unplug those injectors on the diesel while they're running if it's a piezo. There's a bunch of different ways they do injectors. They got the Huey on the old Power Strokes, and then they got the ones that Siemens made that had a little spool valve that went back and forth with a couple of solenoids in it. And they operate on higher voltage. You might notice there, this particular one, 140 volts. See, that's pretty strong voltage, isn't it, on that thing? The Duramax used to run on 93 volts, and the 6 liter ran on 47 volts, and it was 115 volts on the old Power Strokes, you know, with the Huey injector on it. But anyway, this particular, they're ramping the injector, and they're also looking at the Coronal. You know, I mean, but I say that, take it back. They're actually looking at the closing of it and the opening of it. So the negative current, you know, the closing down, you know, open it up. You got to watch that. So it actually has to close it and open it using signals to do it. And there's your firing line, your burn time. You guys need to understand that and all. That's, you know, this is when it fires. And this one right here looks to me like it's running a little bit lean, like it's got a little bit of a problem getting fuel delivery. Anyway, that's the amount of time it burns. And right here, that's how much it takes to keep that spark burning. Usually it'll kick up right here when it runs out of fuel in the chamber, and then there'll be a wave pattern right there, coil oscillation. That one's not too pronounced right there. And see, that's a really nice looking one right there. And so you can look at that. Now this right here, now we're almost through here, this is a CANBUS pattern. And so when you see that tall one right there, it's sort of like a, you know, your little handshake whenever it's starting to talk. It basically knows when it's going to start paying attention to that particular message. It's a sort of a simple, quick way to say that. It's a message-based protocol that's really, really fast. Look at the size of that, 1 megabit per second. What does that mean? Don't ever say 1 megabyte per second, because that's multiplying this by a factor of 8. 1 megabit per second. And I didn't ever give you all the presentation on binary code, binary math, did I? That's one that Timothy will really enjoy. All right, so the CANBUS controller is an active bus developed by Bosch, and thus microcontrollers communicate with each other. Like on the, for example, on the some of the Power Stroke engines that came out, they had that little variable geometry turbocharger on it. It had a little fuel cooler that would, you know, pump through it. And, in other words, it had a cooler that the engine controller had to turn on. And that little that little turbocharger device was talking with a CANBUS to the PCM, and the PCM would request that it give it a particular turbo angle, and this little thing would say, I'm not doing anything until you send me some coolant over here, because I'm hot. You know what I mean? So it had to be kept cool and all that. But the CANBUS lets that stuff talk really fast, and there's 2 or 3 different speeds of CANBUSes. You know, there's high-speed CAN, a low-speed CAN. And all that. So basically, if you're looking, like for example, remember if you're looking on a vehicle and you're trying to find out what's going on with something that's not working, like the instrument cluster or whatever, you do that full scan like you're talking about. You know, the one I'm always fussing, because when y'all are just pulling the code out of a PCM, you do the auto scan and you gotta sit there and wait a while. Go ahead and do the auto scan and see which module's not talking. If it's got that module on it and it ain't talking, you need to find out why. Powers, grounds, connections, salt corrosion in the connector, whatever. Make sure you do that. But look and see, if you got ABS problem, is the ABS module talking? If you got engine controller problems, is the engine controller talking? If you can talk to every module on it but one, then go to that module and see what's going on with the power and grounds getting to it. If it won't talk to your scan tool, but everything else will, if they're all on the bus, right? If they're all talking over the same bus, then you ought to be able to talk to every one of them. Now, you got to recognize too that sometimes there will be a module that's not equipped with that. And the scan tool may be looking for that module, and just because it's not there, you know, if it ain't there, if it's not talking, that means the problem is not there. All right, and we saw this before, you know, we've gone over this one right here. High pressure value, this is atmospheric pressure right here. That's basically whenever your exhaust valve is open. And then exhaust valve closed, then you pull it, this is low pressure because you're pulling atmosphere in, then you squeeze it, you know, you can see all that. It's pretty good stuff. This right here is a little blurb on the very end of this thing. I got this, you know, from these Vitex folks, they're really nice people. And that scope's like the one I got in there. But you can also get a, you know, scope to hook up to your PC on there. And they got color scope lands designed for use for primarily automotive services, as well as PC program, hardware device. A lot of the times they'll have in there where if you're going to check various different systems on the car, you can pick them and it'll already have it kind of set up for you. Okay, did you pick up anything on that? Are you a bunch of happy campers now? Joe?